Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of the Coffee Roaster Warm Sessions podcast. Today we're going to get into some bean talk, talking about all kinds of beans, all kinds of roasts, blends, single origins, all the good stuff, and talk about what we're seeing, what we're noticing, some interesting trends in the industry, and maybe they're not trends, or maybe they're just preferences of people. So we're just going to dig into that a little bit today. I've caught a little bug earlier this week, and just runny nose, stuffed nose, and
I was there last week.
Not fun stuff. I don't know what it was. It's just like, and I don't get sick very easily.
Yeah.
I'm usually like a one dayer.
Yeah.
I feel bad for one day, wake up the next day and I'm ready to rock. But
yeah,
it was a weird one. Unfortunately, coffee does not
does not help with runny noses.
No.
And it's hard to do QC with a runny nose too.
That's true.
Try to cup some coffees with a runny nose.
It's terrible. It's terrible.
Is that drip coming from your spoon or
right.
your nose? Like,
right.
It's
what kind of drip are we talking about here?
Dude, nasal drip.
The outfit drip or the nasal drip, or the batchy drip? It's like all kinds of drips
nasal,
here.
Straight from the Aiden, like
I know.
What's dripping?
I know. So, all right, let's pour some batchy.
It's not really easy to pour with this coat on. No. It's kind of chilly out.
It is.
It's one of the colder days of the week, to be honest.
Little cloudy, cool, and a little rainy. But
this is nice.
Big flavor. It's very nice, actually.
Yeah, it's very nice. I like it.
Oh, dude.
It's pretty bright, but it's also very, it's got good sweetness on it. So it's going to taste like orange blossom. Tropical fruit.
Definitely. Definitely. The only thing is, I would probably go just like
slightly coarser or finer.
No, I think this is dialed. More roast wise, probably like a hint, maybe lighter. It's just leaning a little.
And on your scale of acidity to bitterness. Dude.
That's my new thing. On a scale of acidity to bitterness, where is this
to me? To me, I don't know. To me, this is
But it's still very juicy. I mean, it's punching tropical, punching fruit. I mean, this is probably a coffee that I can see myself like 10 years ago. If I were to have this, I'd be like, what the heck is this?
It's pretty good. I gotta say, it's pretty good.
It's so nice, actually. This is lovely. And I don't know if it's because I don't know, maybe it's because of my experience today, but I think the water might have something to do with it. I don't know.
It's also a month off roast.
It's true.
Almost.
It's true.
Like 4,
3+ weeks.
Yeah.
But
roasted on the 30th to 26th.
It's nice.
Yeah, that's good. Can't complain.
It's really nice.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm very thrilled with this. So it's just, it's juicy. It's hecka juicy. And it's like mouth-watering. Yeah.
Properly extracted.
It's true.
Under or over?
It is. Yes.
It's properly extracted.
No, that was a little
riff to the previous episode.
Yeah, if you haven't watched the last episode with a spontaneous guest, Alex jumped on the pod, talked about some hot takes around different parts of the industry. Go give that a listen. Yeah. But this is the Colombia, the Wilder Lasso Geisha that we have. We have like just a few bags really left of it. Yeah. Like retail bags, that is. Or just one batch, really.
One batch
left. So just a little bit left, and we're done with our first geisha. Yeah. Which was, I don't know, I really enjoyed our time with it. And I think it's a really solid coffee. But
it's also an easy sipper. Yeah.
Easy sipper because it's good.
I guess.
It's like
it's just like it's
anything
enjoyable.
Good you
like
drink
you can just,
is like it just goes down.
Yeah. It's not like it's that's about it. It's like I'm like thinking about like some big naturals that have, you know what's funny is like I think a lot of the times even naturals and washed, both processing methods can produce a punchy cup, right? But I think the way you take that punch is so different depending on processing method.
Fair.
Or a variable of the coffee is processing method. And I think it's also part of what I was like thinking about when we were talking about this episode is like defining factors of buying a coffee. Because if someone walks in and asks me like, or someone's talking to me or texting back and forth and they say like, hey, I just want a punchy coffee.
Right.
Do you automatically think you should suggest a natural?
I think that's a big part of it, but I don't know if I naturally go to a natural.
Yeah.
I think
pun intended.
Yeah, I think that is interesting.
Yeah. Because this coffee is pretty
Would you
punchy.
consider a dark roast punchy? I mean, I think it's pretty punchy.
It's pretty punchy, depending on what kind of punch you want.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
What kind of flavor you want.
Yeah. I was reading an interesting, literally yesterday, looking through some Standard magazine articles, because I have some Standard. I had a year of subscription from Standard, and there was an article that was covering Diego Bermudez, who Diego said, hey, there was a lot of, this is Diego himself who said, there was a wave of people looking for very, scientific, processed, and I'm not talking about by processed, I don't think he means like, except that's not the vibe that I got, was processed like, I don't even know. It was more that he was saying like people are looking for kind of groundbreaking processing and more intense processing and scientific, technologically advanced processing. Yeah. And then he's like, and then he followed that up with saying he's also seeing a very big return to classic profiles. He's seeing roasters and people are asking for a little bit more traditionally, classically processed coffee. Yeah. And that doesn't mean, that also doesn't mean like just with no, like back to basic wash. Because even now we're seeing a lot of coffees dubbed as washed that have like anaerobic washed.
Yeah, hybrid washed.
Semi-washed, hybrid washed, like all these terms where it's like, pretty much a washed coffee. It tastes very clean like a washed coffee. But there's a little bit more fruit on it. There's I mean, most of our menu right now, maybe not most, but the geisha is semi-washed, or it's anaerobic washed. The Miller is anaerobic washed. Yeah. The, I mean, what else do we have on it? What am I forgetting? We had an El Defonso earlier this year. Right. That was semi-washed pink bourbon. Our Francie is a natural, but our Jorge Mendes from Guatemala is probably like a very, very traditional classic
wash.
That's
what I was gonna say, yeah.
But a lot of our coffees I'm noticing is like, it was just a slight anaerobic but washed. And so he was interesting that he was noticing a lot of that swing back to a little more classically produced. Yeah. And I don't think that's the same. That's just like a rule of thumb, a blanket statement answer. Yeah. But it is a trend, and I heard that as well, like a year or two ago from the guys over at Forest Coffee that work with El Virgil, the farm. They were also noticing something, even though they've gone very heavy into like co-ferments. Yeah, they're also noticing stuff. People are requesting clean stuff, So. I don't know why I just went on that rant, but it was something you probably said.
No, that's also interesting, because if roasting companies are buying those coffees, then there is a target coffee drinker for them, right? Right. So you could come up with a observation on both fronts, is to say, if that's what a producer is communicating, then it's almost safe to say that the general consumer, or people who consume coffee generally at home and are buying bags of coffee at home, they are looking for maybe a return towards traditional processing. Yeah. Possibly, right? That's also not to say that, again, like you brought up co-ferments, that co-ferments are not having their moment right now. But I also think that, this might be a hot take, is when I talk to people who don't work in coffee, I talk to people who maybe did you see the post from our buddy boy, our designer, Jordan, throwing in some scoops into his Mr.
Did you ask that question?
I did not.
Oh, I was like, I was itching. I was like, man, who asked this question?
Yeah,
Maybe it's Sergi.
I thought it was you. No, I almost asked him a coffee question, but I didn't. Anyway, like I'm talking about like people like that. Like one, Jordan's not in the coffee industry.
Yeah.
He works with us as our designer.
Yeah.
So he's aware of coffee, very much so.
Yes,
I mean, he's making the labels. He knows, like, we've talked about all the processing methods.
Yeah, right.
All of that. He's putting flavor notes on the bags, literally. So, like, Jordan's aware. But Jordan's also, most of the time, not brewing a pour over, just throwing it into Mr. Coffee. And that's the type of folk that I've been talking to. And what I'm noticing, again, is, like, most of those people don't know what a co-ferment is. Yeah. And if they don't know what a co-ferment is, they're not making their buying decision based on the co-ferment title, right? And I think we've had this conversation a few podcasts ago about, like, you know, what co-ferments are doing for the industry and stuff. I think that conversation is so far away from reality right now that there's just not enough people still that are strictly choosing coffee based on processing.
Yeah. Well,
on the broad,
yeah. And I think that's worth noting is that there is a very big difference between, in the nutshell of the industry that we are in, that is rapidly expanding also, versus the broad. And I think there is importance to stepping out a little bit and being like, oh, okay, we're part of actually a big industry that is including Starbucks.
Yeah.
And that's worth noting. But also, within, I think that changes drastically within, you know, the cafes that we visit, the coffees that we're drinking, the roasters that we associate with and enjoy, the coffees that we choose to roast, the coffees that we choose to sell. Like, we live in a distinct where that is, I think that is very different for us people who think, a lot of people do choose coffees based on processing and processing closely tied with flavor notes, because that is a very real thing. And if you're going, for myself, if I'm going to buy coffee, the first thing I'm going to look at is 100% flavor notes, because I have a preference that I'm leaning towards, and I want to, and at the end of the day, I want to enjoy what I'm drinking. And you're just lining up your preferences with whatever is on there, you know. So,
and I mean, and obviously when you're buying coffee, when you're actually paying for coffee, not just picking up a bag here and there, quote unquote, for free. But when you're buying coffee, you're making a decision based on your interpretation on what those flavor notes mean. Right. Because you have a lot of, like, insight and knowledge within what how you consume coffee, you know. And I think there's a few things to say. Like, I think the cool thing is we have people, the one that listen to our podcast, or we have people in our worlds who literally buy coffee because they know how to decode a label. Right. We also, I talk probably to more people who don't understand the coffee label than do. So they're usually relating ideas like, oh, I want to buy an Ethiopian coffee because it tastes like blueberries, right? So, and what I'm noticing within that is, like, there's also, those people are not just like, are not only Mr. Coffee, like, brewing kind of people. They own an espresso machine. Like, a homie of mine owns, like, a $5,000 setup, and he still buys a local blend. And I was talking to him actually this morning. I was chatting with him about what he's drinking, and we're talking about the Kraken and, like, just having a good old time catching up. I haven't seen him in a while. And I was like, oh, what'd you think? Like, what'd you think of this coffee? And he's like, dude, that coffee is fabulous. But he's like, yeah, I would never buy a bag of that coffee. I was like, what do you mean? Like, why not? You love this coffee. You just love that we're drinking coffee together. You love this coffee. Like, why wouldn't you buy this coffee? And he's like, you know, it's just way too challenging to dial in. Like, then again, to put context here, this dude is not one. He's not a, like, this coffee home barista, like, crazy, like, all that. But he does have, like, a $5,000 setup at home. That's something to say. And he's like, and this is weird, but he's like, I always gravitate towards buying blends. And I'm like, why? because he's like, they're easy to dial in. Again, we've had that conversation on another podcast before. Like, that's also wild to me that someone would say that.
Right.
But there's this gravitation to, again, his buying decision. And I'm not going to say like this or like blend or single origin. He's not even deciding based on blend or single origin. He has another thought that leads him to blends. And that thought is, how easy is it for me to enjoy my coffee at home? Meaning, how easy can I extract that bean juice so it doesn't taste sour or bitter, but tastes pleasant at home? And I think there's that major aspect of, again, like, there's a lot of things that play into how you can extract coffee easy at home and dial it in. Mm-hmm. Roast level is one thing, right? Origin is another thing. But I think I've noticed with my conversations with the general folks who drink coffee day to day, is that they buy coffee based on what they know is going to allow them to have an easy, enjoyable cup. And I think sometimes, especially for folks who, like you and I, who are in the industry a lot, we can almost make any coffee taste good. We kind of forget that valuable insight. And that valuable insight is, as a roasting company, we have to remember that someone's brewing experience at home is crucial to the enjoyment of the cup at home. Mm-hmm. And the coffees that are quote unquote going to sell well or be chosen by the consumer could depend on how easy it is for people to extract them. Mm-hmm. That was a long rant. But you see what I'm getting at? Mm-hmm. It's like, before even people think about origin, before people think about processing method, single origin or blend, before varietal, like, most of the folks I talk to are not even talking about what varietal they're looking. They're not walking in and asking me like, hey, I'm looking for only Caturas or Castillos or Geishas. I haven't talked to a friend of ours who's like, yeah, I only drink Geishas. Right? I don't know. Anyway, that's just what I've been talking to people about and noticing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, there is a very big, stark difference between those people and I think the people that are enthusiasts of specialty coffee.
Right.
That really love, like, the bean. They're like, that's the hobby. Yeah. Like, I mean, I would categorize myself in that as well. Yeah. Like, I love this thing. It's a hobby of mine. Mm-hmm. I'll spend my time watching YouTube videos about it. I'll read the forums, I'll brew. I mean, I have invested into a decent coffee setup. Right. I mean, like, I think that's a very different, category that actually I think prefers a little bit of the hunt for extraction. Right. I think prefers a little bit of the challenge, the difficulty, the nooks and crannies, hey, how can I get this 0.5% more extraction yield?
Right.
Do I need to swap out my burrs to get better tasting coffee? But I think that the interesting thing is, back to this guy, dude. The lab sweets for maximum sweetness. That guy who said it's easier for him to dial in a blend, and which makes me think, like, a lot of home baristas right now are attracted to this ultra light roast kind of niche, and it's a very different. How should I say this? It's still very niche, but it's growing and becoming much more popular. And at the same time, you can't actually brew those ultra light roast. And this is gonna be probably controversial, but you can't brew an ultra light roast with a Baratza Encore and have it taste that great.
Yeah. I mean, you're also making a point there, is that you have to have insanely good gear. To brew that kind of coffee.
Realistically, I'm gonna be like, you cannot brew again. You cannot brew these very ultra light roasts with very, very basic gear and expect a decent extraction. Almost all people that I see brewing ultralight roasts that love this style of roasting, this flavor experience, are brewing with very stacked gear, excellent burrs. I mean, top of the line kettles, the perfect brewer, even buying filters. Like Sybris filters are like so $1 a pop.
Dude, yeah.
So I'm like,
I can't afford them.
Yeah. And I'm saying like these people are you actually have to have a really solid setup to be brewing these ultra light roasts, to have them be semi-enjoyable. Like I can respect them and appreciate those roasts, but they have to be brewed pretty properly. Like you can't get an ultra light roast and have like this is going to sound ridiculous, but like 12% extraction yield. Yeah. And it tastes like there's nothing in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
exactly.
And that brings up like a very just interesting, like, I don't know, nuance, tension, challenge. I don't know, like, and definitely appeals to a very specific crowd of people. But then again, that's the stark difference between, most 80% of the people walking into cafes versus the 20% of the people who,
I would say more than 80% of my friends.
Right. Yeah.
Like even some of my friends that buy Mirror on and off.
Yeah.
Those people still gravitate towards something that is quote unquote either traditional, or they know one thing about the coffee and that's it's a natural. It's going to be very fruity.
Yeah.
Like my friend Jess, she's bought Francie we're almost out of that coffee. So she's been buying it almost once a week.
Yeah.
Because she's like, dude, that's a fruit bomb.
Yeah.
She, as far as I know, she's just brewing that at home on a batch brewer. She's been buying Francie regularly.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? And that's also a pattern that I know. I'm also like, part of this is I'm also slightly tooting our horn because I love how we create our menu. Like I would say we do roast fairly light. Like majority, especially if you want to talk about.
I mean, nowadays with ultra light, I mean, relative. It's very relative. Now it's very hard to put a label on.
According to the reader, we roast fairly light. Yeah. And the preference of flavors that you and I desire come from quote unquote light roasts, right? I guess all of that is convoluted, but you know what I mean. So when I hear, because we do that, the way we create our menu is we honestly don't sacrifice in just saying like, hey, these are all just going to be massive acid bombs that you should wait about 45 days to brew. We don't exclusively do that. There's some coffees, including the one we just had on the pod, that is tasting fantastic 4 weeks off a roast. Better probably than it did 2 weeks off a roast, right? But also there's a lot of coffees, again, going back to mentioning Jess, when she had and has her Francie, it's usually a week to 2 weeks off roast, and she's absolutely blown away by it being a quote unquote fruit bomb. And that's where I'm kind of tooting our horn, is like our coffees are being enjoyed by a wide demographic of people, and I absolutely love that. And I'm also still, when you and I were talking about this, like I'm still curious about like what is going through people's minds when they're choosing a bag, Before a lot of the conversation again was over strictly origin. I remember Kyle Roselle dropped a post or a poll on the gram, and he was talking about like what are people's main deciding factors around buying a bag. And correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was still origin. Right?
Yeah,
no?
I don't know.
And maybe if I'm wrong, but what I'm noticing is still like people are still gravitating towards the quote unquote traditional decision making. Yet a lot of people I don't hear a lot of people talking about quote unquote elevation. Yeah. Like, so a lot of things have changed, and a lot of things have changed in how we market coffee as coffee companies, but also a lot of things have changed in how the general coffee drinker is making decisions on what coffee they're buying.
The general coffee. I think again,
in general, I'm talking about broad stroke.
I think there's a lot of, it's really hard to blanket statement because because people in this sub niche that we're actually in, I would argue, like people are paying attention to a lot of those things,
Right.
And they are very niche specific. They're not throwing it into, you know, a Mr. Coffee,
Right.
And so there is a lot of again tension, and the gamut is pretty wide.
Yeah.
And so I do think that also a side note to what we talked about, like I think the fact that gear is also getting, again, gear plays such a vital role. Like now seeing the X Bloom Studio or whatever, where it'll grind, and it has a spectacular grinder from what I hear, and can brew very good tasty brews. That's crazy, because all of a sudden now you're taking the biggest roadblock, I would say the biggest roadblock to an average person enjoying a lighter roasted coffee that requires way more attention to detail, and, you know, just the fine-tunedness. Things like the X Bloom are completely just abolishing that, and saying now you can have extreme results with a push of a scan of a QR code, you know, whatever, which and you know, as we land the plane, I mean, I think, like, I'm curious what that does.
That's what
that might push people to more, you know, lighter roast, because now coffee's gonna taste better.
That's where, and as we land the plane on that, I think that's a very good way to sum everything up. I think some of the patterns that I've been noticing when talking to people are going to drastically also change within the next 10 years because of technology and automation. I would predict that in less than 10 years, like 10 years, a decade is just too much time, way less than 10 years, we're going to see majority of roasting companies have preset recipes for every coffee that they ship. And automation at home is going to be very normal. And not normal to, like, quote unquote home baristas, but normal to the Mr. Coffee people. Like machines, the accessibility to tools to extract coffee properly is going to be normalized. Things like the X Bloom, like the Aiden, are going to be like, hey, they'll have a tag on the bag that you set the bag on top of the machine, and the recipes in the machine already. Because I had the NFC
the X Bloom thing.
Like, you see what I mean? It'll just be like that.
Of course.
And it'll eliminate that margin of, like,
and now imagine
worrying.
that guy that, you know, your buddy doesn't have to say, well, I'm only buying blends because I struggle to dial them in. Well, what if your grinder just dialed it in for you?
Exactly.
What if it was, you know, hey Joe, good morning. What are you brewing today?
Exactly.
Oh yeah, you know, I'll just dial it in for you, and it's talking to you, and
exactly.
So,
dude. Or Alexa. I was wondering how many, if people are listening to this out loud, how many Alexas would trigger right now. But anyway, it's like, Alexa, brew mirrors Wilder Lasso Geisha. And all of a sudden, the quote unquote, I don't know, the Aiden or McFadden goes off and is grinding and
the
doing
grinder's
everything.
Adjusted, everything is adjusted.
According to roast date. Oh yeah, that coffee is now 18 days off of roast. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, I think stuff like that is going to happen within the next 10 years, and we'll see a monumental shift towards how people purchase coffee again.
Well, there it is, folks. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Coffee Roaster Warm Up Sessions podcast. And as we always say, remember, reflect what's good.